Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Marketplace Risk Management Virtual Event Series. I am Andrea, Director of Events and Logistics here at Marketplace Risk. Today we welcome John Green, VP of Marketplaces Approve, and Tim Brown, Head of Product Approve. Our virtual events are designed to help marketplace and sharing economy startups successfully navigate complex risk management, trust and safety, compliance, and legal subject matter, so they can avoid distractions in order to focus on launching and growing. Be sure to check out marketplacerisk.com to access hundreds of hours of content, including our master's program, platform podcast, and previous live events, and to subscribe to our newsletter where we keep you up to date on everything, including the Marketplace Risk Management Conference in San Francisco and the Sharing Economy Global Summit in London. If you're interested in speaking at one of our events, please submit your ideas at marketplacerisk.com. The call for speakers closes on March 15th for the Marketplace Risk Management Conference and August 15th for the Sharing Economy Global Summit. Thank you everyone for tuning into today's session, Digital Identity, 5 Trends Leading Marketplaces Should Know for 2022. First, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be available for you to access on the Marketplace Risk website. Second, all attendees have listening capabilities only and are otherwise muted. And third, do submit your questions via the control panel. If we have time at the end, we will answer as many as we can. If we do not get your questions, feel free to email us at info@marketplacerisk.com and we'll get your questions answered. And now without further ado, John and Tim, I'll hand things over to you.
All right, thank you very much. If we want to jump to the next slide, to prove is the modern way of proving identity with just a phone. And so just a brief overview of Prove. And so there's a lot of signals out there for identity. The Prove team has really built what we think is a best-in-class solution around using your phone and more specifically your phone number to create really great digital identity solutions that balance and can walk that line of a great experience with mitigating fraud or creating trust and safety, and doing so in a very seamless way for users. And it's a tough line to be able to walk, and it's something that everyone on the call here struggles with, right? And it's a bit of a moving target as we go, as we sort of the identity space grows and everyone's businesses grows. But it's something we've done very well. We'll talk about a lot of the details, but suffice to say, over 1,000 companies have chosen to use our methodologies in a variety of different markets, ranging from business services to retailers and marketplaces, as you see below. So with that, why don't we jump to the next slide? And again, you're sort of talking a little bit about a few different constituents around reducing fraud and creating a better onboarding experience. And digital identity is such a buzz topic right now in marketplaces, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. But one of the reasons that we see that from our experiences is that when you create a really great identity experience, right, you can really delight customers and also really differentiate how your company looks and users interact with it from the competition. And we'll talk a little more about that later, but I want to turn over to Tim and just sort of get your perspective, as a head of product and working with a lot of marketplace companies. Why do you think digital identity is so important to people now?
For sure, John. I mean, from what I've seen, marketplace customers are actually predominantly using digital identity and digital identity technologies as an enabler and a differentiator. I mean, in a lot of verticals, we focus solely on fraud and risk. I mean, you see that in fin services, you see that in traditional enterprise deployments. But in this marketplace segment, being an enabler and differentiator is hugely important. It's not just about reducing that fraud and risk. It's also about easing onboarding. It's about ensuring that buyers and sellers are who they claim to be, making sure that there's trust and safety between those two as they interact with each other. That's a huge driver. Imagine if you will that you're a passenger in a rideshare application. Having a trusted and safe platform is paramount to you as a rider, but it's also hugely important for the driver as well. And of course, you can't ignore the fact that revenue is always a big driver for any vertical. So easing onboarding with as little friction as possible is a big part of the experience. Driving down manual reviews of applicants and a better customer experience are a couple areas I think we can directly impact revenue. And I'm sure, John, you've got a pretty deep experience in the marketplace industry, so I'm quite sure that you have some interesting things that you've worked with and tops, that are tops of marketplace clients' minds. I'd love to hear some more from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you one thing, one anecdote from a recent meeting we had with a marketplace, and they were sort of struggling with there was some significant trust and safety issues going on in their sort of online to offline process, and theft and other sort of trust and safety issues in in-person meetings. And the question that sort of came up and they were sort of grappling with was, well, we want to make users who want to, not the service providers, but the people who are acquiring those services or buying those services, we wanted to make it as easy as possible. And we want to allow them in with, essentially no identity. So, and those were the people who were creating fraud or more trust and safety incidents on the platform. And so we talked a lot about, well, maybe having an anonymity as a user of a service is not a great idea anymore, because those people, if you don't know who they are in any way, there's no checks, then it allows them maybe too much freedom. Now you have to balance that with, well, if we put too much friction into the onboarding process for users, they'll just go somewhere else. And so, it's this sort of line that has to be walked, and one that I think as a trend, and I know we're going to move into trends soon, but is one that I think people are more and more saying, well, we need to put some level of check, into that process, even the onboarding of users. So that was one thing that I think is sort of, is out there that's important for us to be talking about.
Well, that's actually a good segue. Let me back up here. I just skipped one too many slides, but that's an excellent segue into the top identity proofing challenges. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, top identity challenges and sort of trends. I mean, again, it's how do you create something that's going to give assurance that's without making it too arduous. And I think one of the great things is that there's a lot of really innovative companies, certainly Prove, I think is right on the top there, who's solving that problem with seamless experiences that solve and make it very difficult for people to get around these identity checks, but do so in a way that maybe like we talk about under 10 seconds, allowing people to get fully verified. And so if you can do that with, either no actions for a user or very minimal actions for a user, you can sort of have your cake and eat it too, right? You can seamless experiences that also provide the trust and safety you need.
Yeah, and I think that when I look at this specific vertical, I think there's, to that point, right, that I think the primary challenge is really about accessibility. We both mentioned previously that ease of onboarding isn't really just a nice to have, it's a necessity, especially in any vertical really, but it's even more important when you're asking consumers to play a huge outsized role in your platform. So many identity proofing techniques that I've been involved with over the years introduce a lot of consumer friction, and I'm specifically thinking about capturing driver's licenses, asking for selfie captures, and being sensitive to the role that face recognition is playing in today's world, and proving that you're alive in some way, standing on one foot and doing a tap dance or something like that while you're capturing your selfie, right? And in some instances, I imagine that friction is warranted. If you're onboarding drivers and you're making sure that that they're not and that there's not some issues with background checks and things like that. So maybe waiting 24 hours to onboard them is okay. But for the general population or for most consumers, I think easy onboarding onto the platform with a low friction experience, and to your point, like we like to say, in under 10 seconds we're done, and we have huge approval ratings with very low fraud. That's actually the brass ring, right, that we want to shoot for. And look, and honestly, the onboarding process is the first thing that a customer sees when engaging in the platform. So, with that first experience, there's a lasting impression on, and I think that directly correlates to abandonment, and those, and clearly abandonment rate directly impacts revenue. We've had customers who report, 5% or more abandonment rates with their currently a digital identity verification vendors, and when we were able to drive those rates down substantially, and to drive more revenue at the top of the funnel. So I think, and then it segues, into challenge number 2, which is really about risk. And I think that's a big part of the conversation today is, how do you identify real buyers and sellers, and what is that trade-off between risk and onboarding and onboard friction, and other types of potential, risk elements that may be in the marketplace. We've talked a bit about the real buyers and sellers, but I'd love to, what other types of risks do you see, like specifically in the marketplace segment?
Well, so I think that whether it's buying or selling, it's the notion that people are having offline experiences, and there's a whole safety component to that. And so that it's a little different than a piece of fraud that a bank might need to write off. I mean, it really comes down to the underlying value that a lot of services are bringing is a trusted environment. And so there's a balance again of having this first run and making it easy, but the consequences can be quite severe, both personally and for company in the space. One of the things you said, Tim, that maybe I wanted to sort of touch on a little bit too is an experience that we have. It's with a financial services company, but I think there's a lot of relevance to marketplaces, because when we talk to marketplaces, everybody wants to get people on and using the system as quickly as they can. And there's so many, the vast majority of users are really good. We have some financial services companies that sort of do the same thing, and some of the learnings were, one in particular was onboarding credit cards. And what they found was when they put, and we'll talk about our pre-fill solution in a bit, but they were able to do all the great stuff we talked about, get great users, good users on board in less than 10 seconds, and pre-fill applications, make it a great experience. But what they also found was that was roughly 7% of people would opt out, and of that pre-fill sort of experience. And what we found was that all the fraud lived in that 7%. And there were still good users in that 7%. The majority were still good users, but a couple percent of the percentage points of those were the fraud lived. And but that 7%, if they didn't want to go through our process, which was sort of very seamless, straightforward, they had to go through a more arduous process. But what we found is that the users were really self-selecting themselves into an area that also had a lot of fraud in there. So some good users had to go through a higher friction process to even get into the system to start using it. But the company was okay with that because they really self-selected themselves into that higher friction place. And, again, 9 out of 10 people were getting on within 10 seconds very easily. So wanted to put that in there because I think there's a lot of relevance for how do you get users on board quickly and easily, but then also sort of herd the bad actors potentially into a place where you can only impact a small percentage of the people you're trying to get onto your system.
For sure. That totally makes sense. All right, so that's actually a good segue. We'll move into the top 5 digital identity trends. So if you want to start there, and then I can kind of chime in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a few of these things. I think is fraud number 1, and fraud is rising. I think there's a lot of data that probably most people on the webinar you're in the business and know about, but clearly consumer fraud digitally on services is rising. It's well into the many billions of dollars a year. But I do think that there's a trend where bad actors are targeting delivery services or other gig economy marketplaces more than they ever had before. They're finding ways to interact, and so I think that's one thing that is just really important to see that this isn't going away, and it's only right now getting worse.
Excellent. Yeah, I think out of this list, the top 5 here, I'm actually interested being more of a on the technology side of things rather than sales, I'm very interested in sort of the way that how the technology is impacting the marketplace vertical. I mean, I think these actually apply across the board. So I'd like to focus on 3, 4, and 5. From identity techniques are certainly evolving. I mean, we've rapidly moved. I've personally been in the identity industry for quite some time now, and we've been rapidly moving past what was sort of the de facto stance of using identity document verification into much more low friction implementations that rely on more signal intelligence and what we anecdotally call exhaust, authentication exhaust and things like that, and sort of like a more of a reusable credential or reusable identity infrastructure, like we talk about in number 5 here. To me, that actually, as these techniques evolve and are getting much better, we've definitely seen a movement away from those heavier techniques for a majority of people, like you talked about. The second here, number 4, use of machine learning and AI is really making great strides in how we can evaluate this. And I think you see this happening in a lot of spaces that are supporting the identity world, like risk-based authentication. But that's still tied heavily to data that can be easily accessed on the web or found on the web. That's really can be manipulated in certain ways. For me, and certainly what we do internally to prove, we're seeing loads of machine learning advances that as it relates to what we call possession, reputation, and ownership. And I'll touch on that in a bit. That's strongly rooted to a cryptographic truth, such as the SIM card in your device or a specific set of keys or cryptographic keys. And we feel like that offers a superior performance over RBA and other approaches because it's hitting on the high coverage and high efficacy with the lowest friction possible, and most importantly, lowering with the lowest amount of fraud because it is tied directly back to a cryptographic reality. And then we talk about how digital identity being a buzzword. I think inside the digital identity space, reusable identity is a huge buzzword and is really starting to take off as a recognized concept, especially now, and then we'll definitely see it in the Web3 world coming. That's going to be coming for us all, and it really simply means that at the end of the day, it's a consumer has control over their identity and it's portable and can be used in different ways over a variety of different channels. So let's say I have a Prove identity, it's this thing on my phone or it's in a web wallet or something like that. I can use that to assert my identity to my rideshare app or into the rideshare platform, whether I'm a driver or a passenger. And the rideshare app would comfortably know that I'm in possession of that device and my identity is tied to it. And when I assert it, it's with an extremely high level of confidence that's attached to it. And that same identity could then be very portable, and I could use that to assert my identity into my bank or my grocery delivery service or anything like that. That's really the reusable aspect of it. And so I mentioned the fact that we do what we call possession, reputation, and ownership as part of the Prove space. I mean, that these identity techniques are evolving, and so we have a very specific mantra for it. This Pro methodology that we call it. It's tied to some heavy identity, some heavy machine learning techniques that go along with it. And so what do I mean by Pro? So we actually talk about, is Tim, or in this case, John on the screen, physically in possession of the phone? So we're able to tie back to a device based on 128-bit encryption. We look for what we call, how do we trust a device on first use of, the first use of that device, or trust on first use is a terminology we've been using internally. And how do we do it with a high level of accuracy, leveraging all the device intelligence that's part of it. But more importantly, once I've done that, how do I've initiated that bind and connected Tim to that device. How do I authenticate in subsequent visitations with that device to make sure that Tim is still indeed holding it? And so we have a suite of authenticators that do that. We call Prove Auth, that focus on building that bind and then trusting on subsequent use. So that's possession. So the reputation we talk about, what's the actual reputation of the device? And when you stop and think about it, it might sound funny to say, how do I attach a reputation to an inanimate object? You know, is it going to go out and steal a car or whatever? But it's true. We actually do look at the reputation of the device and think about how you know, how we can score it at any moment in time to determine whether it's trustworthy. And we look at signals. We look at a whole host of signals in that reputation. So we're looking at, you know, disconnects in the past. You know, have there been any SIM changes? You know, at least, you know, in the past, you know, especially SIM changes that may have occurred in the last day or two, would have an outsized impact on that trustworthiness. You know, carrier changes, ownership tenure, all this factors into this reputational score, and it's calculated in real time. And then we use it as part of our reusable identity graph. And then finally, ownership. You know, does Tim or does John even own this number? I mean, we're looking at, similar to reputation, we check a variety of signals and to see that this still belongs to John. And that factors into, really starts to tie tightly to this notion of identity assurance, where we're saying, you know, how confident am I that John or Tim is actually holding this phone, you know, and when they're asserting their identity. We balance all three of these things through our sophisticated machine learning techniques, and then we pump out a holistic picture of the device and the person holding the device, and that ultimately drives some very high confidence in the identity that's attached and the person who's asserting it at that point in time. So I'll skip ahead here to the next slide.
Tim?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had one question and one point I wanted to make before we jump to the next thing. Question, you mentioned SIM. For everyone out there who may not know what a SIM is, can you give a little bit update on, or a little bit of information on what that is?
Sure, for sure. So the SIM card that's in your phone device, your phone is cryptographically secure. It's basically issued by the MNOs, the mobile operators, when you buy your phone. So it may have already had it in there, or if you've swapped carriers, you may have gotten a new SIM to be able to plug into your phone. And really that ties your phone number to that specific device in a cryptographic way, and asserts itself across the mobile operator network. And so if I, for instance, make a phone call to you, John, and I know that it's going to arrive to you because the network knows that the phone that it's going to is connected to that SIM, and it's and you're going to answer. So I short of somebody figuring out how to do a SIM swap, which is a problem, you know, for sure, that's one of the things that we address in our trust score. You know, short of somebody doing a SIM swap and convincing the MNOs to send them a new SIM, they get the new SIM, put it in, and then all of a sudden that becomes associated with your number. It's a cryptographic truth that's very difficult to break. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it helps. I think it certainly helps me. I guess we'll hear from others. One of the things I think you say is, you know, you've brought up a few times the cryptographic truth, and I do think that's something that's really relevant and important because for the last 3, 5, 7 years, the term machine learning and AI has been sort of, you know, all the rage as far as, you know, how do you get to the next level of whether it's fraud or identity or other things. That was sort of how platforms got better and smarter. And I think what you're talking about here is something we see is really effective. Is the next level, the next phase of improvement that we see is around cryptographic truths. And if you can base decisions on those, you know, fully encrypted connections that are made that can't be broken, that have a definitive, you know, more definitive, you know, answer to them, that makes things very strong. That makes the checks that are being run, you know, extremely strong, and we see that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're spot on. It is, you know, it's one thing to be able to say, well, I think that this you know, that you're the proverbial dog sitting behind the keyboard, right, from the cartoon back in the 90s of, you know, only you're the only one that knows you're a dog on the internet, right? But now we're able to say with an extraordinarily high level of confidence that it's you, John, answering the phone when you answer, because of the cryptographic truth that is associated with that SIM card, as well as you know, a bunch of other techniques and getting back to your ML comment, a bunch of other machine learning techniques that tie in other behavioral signals and activity and things like that that we see going across the network and across our identity graph.
Yeah, great. And maybe just one other anecdote that I wanted to sort of put in here at the time with the Pro. And one of the things we talked to a delivery company that was having a problem where drivers were creating hundreds of accounts in some cases, and they were creating, committing fraud, stealing stuff they're supposed to be delivering. And what happened was they would, essentially, this person is, this account, let's disable it. And then the driver didn't really care. They had hundreds, if not more, of accounts already stored up, and they sign in the next day with another account. And what the Pro methodology is able to do is determine, well, someone may have, if they've created another account, if they're even able to do that, are they on the same phone, right? Are they now, and does the person associated with this account, is that attached to the device they're using? And so there's a few things. One is we would attach those accounts as being the person on those accounts would not be relevant. But another thing that it makes you do is if a person were to try to break, they'd have to create more phones, more devices, or more phone numbers, and that sort of raises the effort and the cost associated, with trying to create any sort of bad action on a network. And so those are two really important things to be thinking about. Like, how do you make it harder, more expensive? Because at a certain point, it's just not worth the time for bad actors to try to do those things on your platform. Back to you, Tim.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and move forward to the next slide and talk a little bit about what does a modern marketplace onboarding look like. So we've actually mocked up of some CXs here to kind of talk about some things, some things that have been really successful for us in some of the implementations that we've done, not just in the marketplace, but also in other verticals. So what you see here is a mock-up of our pre-fill flow. What we do is we actually look for consent from the end user first. I know I'm a big proponent of privacy and a big proponent of ensuring that you're gathering consent from end users and being very transparent about the gathering of that consent. So we look to gather consent first and foremost, and then ask for a minimal amount of data here. So we've got information about the phone that's on, and then we also are talking about, give me your month, the month and day of your birth date, and we go ahead and look to autofill the information. So then we can reach out and say, okay, this is, in this case, Howard Rourke, and here's his phone number, there's a social security number, is that a current address, that type of thing. So we can easily provide information that can be flowed directly into the application process for onboarding a person, and all this happens in under 10 seconds. We're typically seeing that at about 79% faster than these other friction-filled approaches. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I've actually lived in Florida. I have a Florida driver's license, and for some reason, whenever I try to do a document capture on a Florida driver's license, or my driver's license specifically, it always gives me lots of trouble. So it's, I spend upwards of minutes when I'm trying to onboard into a platform like this. And so that's actually a good segue. So this is great as a customer experience, and as a skeleton of what it looks like, but does this actually work? And we do this for a variety of the earlier slide that John touched on. We've got thousands of customers, and they're all successfully pre-filling with an extraordinarily high rate of success. So we have a product we call Proof Pre-Fill that is specifically designed to do exactly what we're talking about here. It's designed to autofill their applications using bank-grade identity data from authoritative sources. So we're sourcing them from a number of different places, pulling a bunch of information and then going through it and making sure that it's accurate. We're also applying our Pro methodology from an authentication standpoint to make sure that the device is trustworthy. And we found that in doing this, we thwart all the top account opening fraud techniques that are out there. And we do it with a great reduction in false positives. So that no longer is it, I'm authenticating, and then I hit on somebody else's identity or something like that. And then most importantly, we have this notion of we have a reusable identity credential network that's extensive, given the breadth of customers that we see across the globe, and we're able to leverage the fact that we're seeing those folks and really drive confidence in the identity that we're connecting to. So, John, you want to talk a little bit more about pre-fill, or should I move on?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk just a couple thoughts, because I think marketplaces, sometimes you want to, the onboarding process might just be give us your name and some way to contact you, like an email or a phone, right? And then let's get you on board, and then let's put more identity checks or maybe when you go for your first usage of the platform, and that's fine too. I think what you see here is the ability to, if you give me your number, I will make your onboarding process easier, right? Which is by pre-filling all this information that you will need to provide. The other part of that is, and we've seen people who will do the full verification and authentication of the consumer data and make decisions of whether or not someone could get in the door right up front. We've also seen people say, well, we want to take the number and then have that number on record as part of the account, and then start bringing the verification and authentication pieces of what Proof does later on at that point when they're trying to start, do their first job or whatnot, so they can engage in the community or in the marketplace. But you now have that number. If it changes, or if the number changes when they're trying to start working or using the community, now you know that. And so it's nice to be able to upfront very seamlessly get a piece of information that you're able to then use down the line. And sort of maybe I would compare that to, like Tim mentioned, let's say a document scan. So you do a document scan, you do a face, and then you use that face on an ongoing basis, which some marketplaces use. I think that's an okay solution, and there's good points and bad points about that, but there's certainly some validity there. One of the problems, though, is that the upfront friction is so great, you lose a lot of people. Where a solution like this, where you have the phone, is much more seamless. You're going to have abandonment, but you're still going to have that ongoing authentication capability. So, Tim, back to you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess one additional thing, I know we touched on it. You touched on this before when you cited a specific example about fraudster self-selecting. I think we typically see somewhere between 5 and 7% of on average of people opting out of pre-fill for one reason or another. But like you said, a majority of those people are fraudster, or I'd say majority of those people. We are finding that the fraudsters are in that population, which makes it easier and more manageable to kind of to route them into more strict reviews and controls. And I think it would be remiss without talking a little bit about how we could easily update this QR code, or this pre-fill experience. One way right now that's pretty trendy is driving people through QR codes to accomplish actions. I mean, after coming out of the pandemic, how many menus have you scanned over the last 2 years for using a QR code? So we're seeing these, QR codes are making a resurgence. We saw the Super Bowl commercial with QR code that caused issues for Coinbase, but it's more and more people are interacting with the world around them through QR codes. So what we've seen customers starting to do is find novel ways to drive people to a pre-fill experience. So they host a QR code, and the user can scan it, and then it'll take them directly into. So it says, "Do you want to be a driver for our rideshare app?" And you say, if you do, scan this QR code, and that's the commercial you see on TV. User whips out their phone, scans it, and it takes them directly into this pre-fill experience to onboard the customer. So that's pretty cool. And incidentally, if you want more information about our marketplace offers, you can scan this QR code that's on the screen now, and that should take you directly to our website for some additional information. So let's talk about, I'd love to talk a little bit about how this pre-fill product has impacted our customers. We've seen an amazing impact. We've seen 35% reduction in onboarding abandonment. And so that directly translates into revenue and at the top of your funnel. Faster onboarding, so going down from close to a minute to 10 seconds. An increase in auto approvals. Why is this important? Well, it's important because I no longer have to have manual reviews or subject people to much more in-depth screenings. We are seeing a high number of customers who are saying yes to pre-filling their data. So 93%, that is and then of course the other 7% we're finding has the majority of the fraudsters that are showing up in there. And overall, we're seeing about a 75% fraud reduction relative to attack rate. And so, John, I don't know if you wanted to touch a little bit more here too, or.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that constantly sort of, I calls me is the 93%. And so, you can have great solutions, but if the consumers don't like it or they don't want to be a part of it or they abandon when you ask them, then that's a problem, right? And the bigger problem than any of the potential results you get from whoever does go through a flow. And so the 93% of consumers say, yes, if you ask me to give you your number in an onboarding flow, I'm going to do that, right? I'm comfortable with that. I see the value of saving my the time, and it's a very easy thing to do. And again, in some cases, you don't even need to ask consumers to do the inputting of the number. We would know that via the rooted trust sort of network that we have access to. But I think that's really important because users are willing to use this. That the ones that don't want to are typically ones that you want to put a little more friction into place.
Awesome.
So back to you, Tim.
Oh yeah, so I was just, the next slide is key takeaways. So how to upgrade your digital identity roadmap. I can touch on a couple of these, and I'm sure you have some comments as well. I mean, just to go back and recap a bit. You want to onboard users with confidence and with as little friction as possible when it absolutely makes sense to do that. Verify the actual person behind the device. I mean, this may seem pretty self-evident, but I think there's been some examples in the news lately of fraudsters asserting their identities in ways that that attack some of these more traditional approaches to doing identity, like DocAuth and things like that. And I think so having a way that you can seamlessly onboard, but also make sure that the actual person is holding that device is important. And using that phone as an omni-channel authenticator. And I know we didn't really talk about channels in this case. I think about them as can I log in from, can I apply from my desktop? Can I apply from my mobile phone? Can I apply from my tablet? Those types of channels is what I'm talking about here. And then using that phone as a way across those channels to be able to be that authenticator for you. So when I come back into the application, or I'm logging into my desktop, I can easily push a request to my phone and make sure that it's still me that's holding it. And then certainly leveraging the trust and safety of a reusable identity. I think this should really is a point to drive home, is that if you've got an identity that's trusted in many different places and it's being reused, you're able to leverage the sort of the de facto trust that's inherent in that scheme, as well as the fact that you're seeing this credentials being seen in a number of different places without any fraud attached to it is highly important. And then finally, opt for tools that enhance your customers' experiences. Again, this is probably the biggest driver for revenue impact, is making sure that you're able to onboard people delightfully and in a way that makes it that they can successfully get through the process without any headaches, and can turn into successful buyers and sellers on your networks.
Yeah, Tim. I mean, I'm relatively speechless because I think you covered most everything. Well, I think the only thing I would sort of double click on is sort of the points you made around if you're able to you're working with providers that can see historical usage of that identity, albeit anonymized, and that this phone or this thing that we're looking at has been used in a variety of ways, at a variety of times, that in a variety of places, that really showcase that this is a real user that's doing the right things. Again, that increases the effort and cost and complexity that a would-be bad actor would have to go through. And that's really an important thing. And I think, to the last point, that's an introduction or segue to another piece of the future that we're really interested in, is reusable identities and how that comes. And I think that's something that Prove, as well as others, are working on, and it's going to be an exciting thing in the years to come, to make good users that show they're good users, make their experiences better and better.
Excellent. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Andrea, do you have some questions?
Yeah, we can definitely switch to Q&A if you guys are ready.
Or John, do you have something else you want to add?
No, I just think that was my job, was to take us over to the Q&A. So
sorry about that.
Okay, perfect. Well, we had a few come in, so we have about 5 questions right now. We'll see how many we can get through. Our first one will be for John. One attendee asked, I just went through a process to change my phone number via carrier due to a location move. Does the new number carry forward the historical reputation with my carrier?
Yeah, actually, I can answer that, Andrea. It does. It's the score. We see a lot of we see all the signals from the carriers, from disconnects to line changes to carrier changes, things like that. They come through our system, so we're able to factor all those things into it. I will say that if you change a SIM in doing that, it has the potential to decrease the trust score a little bit. We do that to be safe, but then we're able to quickly, depending on usage and other factors, we're able to quickly ramp that score back up again once we're confident that it's you that has that number. So it's a living score. It's calculated on a daily, on a real-time basis whenever the call is made. That says how do I trust this device, and we can come back and calculate it directly. And so we've got some sophisticated rules around how we do that calculation, and it factors into a number of different things.
So if I could just real quick to it, a little bit of a higher level or simplistic level. So we talked about SIM swaps, same phone on the same network, and changing sort of the guts of the say the brain or the chip that controls that phone, and then the notion of a port, or keeping everything the same potentially, but changing from AT&T to Verizon. And what typically happened in the past is that you would show up as a Verizon customer with no reputation, no history, and therefore would sort of have to start all over again. And so a lot of users would then sort of be back to square one without that sort of historical trust that you built up with customers or with accounts and services that you built up that trust for. So what Tim is saying, it's been a hard problem to solve, but we have solutions to minimize that issue. Now, at the same point, if someone to change a network and then within 24 hours want to make a major change, like take out all the cash in savings account, like that, we would be able to pass back flags that our customers then use to sort of think a little more strategically about how they interact. But I'll stop there, Tim. Anything to add based on that?
No, perfect. That was awesome.
Amazing. Another question we had come through was, Tim or John, whoever wants to take this, can you customize the data that is able to be pre-filled? For example, more than just your address, social security, etc.
So we do have a set of information that comes back that includes the phone number, timestamp, line date, line type. So if it's a mobile, landline, VoIP, I know that a lot of customers will key off of that to help them assist the decisioning that they're doing. It also means you may want to imply some additional fraud considerations around that. If it's I know a lot of people find if you're expecting this to come this number to be a mobile line and they come back as a VoIP, then maybe that's an indicator that somebody's trying to socially engineer the system or something like that. Carriers included. We include, obviously the first name, last name, addresses, the extended address, city, region, postal code, date of birth, social. So that's a majority of the information that is included. And we're always looking to expand those attributes. A good example of that is email address. We've looked at some ways to be able to pull an email address as well. It turns out it's a difficult problem to solve because people have a lot of email addresses for spam capture and things like that, or for and then with a lot of the privacy things that like Apple and people are like that are doing now with randomized email addresses. So we've been hesitant to pull it in until we're confident that has a high level of accuracy associated with it, and our coverage numbers are there.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question we had: what customer verification software do you recommend? So far, I have seen Verif.com and WithPersona.com.
John, you want to take that one?
What custom verification platforms do we recommend?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot out there, and certainly Prove offers direct access to our APIs, for a variety of our products that typically people can find very valuable with a direct relationship. I think, there's broader ones. I think there's a few mentioned. It really just depends on what your needs are. But happy to talk further. We both have our own direct sort of access to our APIs. We have partners that we work with that incorporate our solutions, sort of with limited code or no code sort of style solutions. So
yeah,
it's a vast market out there. I don't know, Tim, if you want to take anything on top of that.
I was just simply going to say, yeah, Prove.
Yeah,
we both work with Prove, so Prove's the right answer in that regard. I think what you're getting, but seriously, I think you touched on something there, that there are plenty of orchestration platforms that are out there as well that help pull together some things that maybe you might need from compliance reasons and other things outside of the traditional verification stuff that we do. So.
Yeah, I might add too, like what we do see is a lot of folks who will use our solutions and then maybe on front of some other platforms as well. So they, our data tends to play really well in concert with other solutions, that you can build and orchestrate.
Excellent. Any other questions, Andrea?
Yep. So next one, does the pre-fill solution actually verify the identity of the applicant, or is it just auto-filling the information?
It does. That's one of the really nice things about it. It's not simply just an auto-filling application. It's doing a number of things behind the scenes. It's checking for possession of the device. It's actually going through the entire pro experience behind the scenes to make sure that you are holding the device and you are that identity that's attached to it as it's going through the process of doing that pre-filling.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'll just double click on that too. I mean, that's what makes it so powerful, is that by the end of every 10 seconds, limited user work, you have a fully authenticated user. That in the fin service places, although there's people on this call that likely have to think about KYC or AML types of regulations, but and I'll preface to say that we don't typically give, you talk to your own compliance teams, but that many of our fin services to achieve compliance for KYC, with our pre-fill solution in certain regions where it's applicable and the laws work. So I would just say that's a really strong reason, and then you only have to you don't have to go to these higher friction step up or escalation checks with a very small number of your user base. Any other questions?
Yeah, so we have two more. I think we should have time. Does the pre-fill solution work on mobile phones only, or can it be used if the customer is on a desktop or tablet? And what role does digital identity play in protecting buyers and sellers in a gig economy?
I can take the first one, John, if you want to take a shot at the second one.
Sure.
Yeah. I mentioned omnichannel in a previous slide. The solution is mobile phone centric, but it can be used across. We've actually seen it used across desktop and tablets as well. Typically, the experience looks like certainly tablets have have a SIM. A lot of tablets have a phone number attached to it, so that makes it easier for us to integrate directly on the tablet. But we can also have an experience that's sort of more like a web to mobile experience where I arrive at a website and I redirect the user to their phone through a link that's sent to their phone, and then they click through it, and that takes them through the pre-fill experience directly on the phone. And that information gets returned back to the originator of the request, the application, the web app, or whatever it is. So that's typically how we see that omni-channel experience unfold. And there are creative ways to approach it, but it does rely. We do rely on. We can do a full desktop experience as well, and just confirm that the person isn't, not just necessarily have them walk through the user experience of the pre-fill on their phone, but just send out a notification to their phone to make sure that they are in possession of it. So we have some techniques to be able to do that, and then have them return back to the desktop to finish through the pre-filling experience. So there's a few different ways to kind of crack that nut to address it, and it really depends on the user experience you're trying to find. But the simple answer is yes, it can work across those multiple channels.
Yeah, I find, I'll just touch base to touch on that, is you're on a desktop or a web browser, while we can pre-fill the applications, there's other ways. There's autofill and stuff as well. So I think what people think about using our pre-fill, yes, we can. There's value in doing that, but there's not as much value on a mobile phone. But the other part is that the authentication of that user on an IP, address that has problems, with that. And so by bringing in pre-fill, it makes a subtle difference and in the user experience, but it makes also a big difference in the authentication of that user, because you're now kicking out to the mobile device and the mobile network where we can get to that hardware or cryptographic root of trust, as an authentication step.
Perfect.
So, question, I believe. Can you repeat that? Because I had trouble hearing it the first time around.
Yeah, the last question was, does the pre-fill solution work on mobile phones only, or can it be used if the customer is on a desktop or tablet? And what role does the digital identity play in protecting buyers and sellers in a gig economy?
Okay, so I think the second question is where we're at. What role does digital identity play? I mean, I think, protecting everything, an increasingly, more and more important role when users come on. You need to know who they are. Oftentimes with marketplaces, if you want, let's say, like drivers or workers, you go through a very arduous process and expensive process in bringing people on. You do background checks, which are expensive. You ask for documentary evidence, and all of those things happen, and they're all based off of, is this the right person? Are we doing a background check on the right person? And if you don't have that identity really solid, you're doing a background check on the wrong person, and you're spending money. You're allowing people to get through that door, and it's without that you shouldn't. So identity becomes, I think, more and more important. We've seen a lot of scenarios where the person who signs up for an account then transfers the usage of that account, whether it's giving giving access to my account to somebody else to log on for a driving shift or a delivery shift, or a variety of other uses. And those are all things that the marketplaces really want to stop. And it comes down to knowing the identity.
Amazing. And we have a few more minutes. Our last question we have is, as we've heard in the news, facial biometrics can be a regulatory challenge in terms of privacy. Does Prove offer authentication technology that is more privacy enhancing?
We do. I talked a little bit about our possession checks and being bundled as part of our what we call our Prove Auth stack. We tie in a bunch of different technologies there for us to establish that you're in possession of it. Certainly the binding aspect of TrueAuth is the most important part, and that's it can be done without biometrics. But once we've established that, we have ways that we can incorporate things like behavioral data, how you interact with the phone, build models around how you walk, things like that can actually apply directly to biometric checks downstream after you bound to the device. And we can also do some things with leveraging on-device biometrics that I think all of us, at least I know, I use on a regular basis, so I find quite trustworthy. I think the challenges from a regulatory compliance perspective have been largely related to so-called one-to-many facial recognition types of systems out there that are doing surveillance style things that people find objectionable. But when it comes down to on-device biometric technology, I think it's a little more palatable. And look, at the same time, there are a lot of at least in the United States, a lot of the states are starting to enact very specific laws into place that tackle or address biometrics or prevent them being used without extraordinary consent from the individual. And I think that loops back really well to one of the statements I made earlier, which is, when we do this pre-fill process, we want to be quite transparent about the consent that we're gathering and what we're doing with the types of data that we're pulling and the things that we're going to do. So I think that it's all has to be, no matter what you do, has to be grounded in that consent truth.
Yeah, and I would just add, there's, Tim did a great job here highlighting sort of some of the issues or concerns there might be around just the authentication process. But I sort of go back to, if the road to get there, like every biometric has to be sort of binded with an upfront authentication and then binded to that behavioral or that biometric. If the upfront process is so arduous, or if you could find a much less arduous process for the upfront binding, then you're just going to have more success down the road as with your authentication sort of strategy. And so I think that's where the phone-centric approach is going to just be much more seamless, and you're going to get a lot more buy-in from your user base.
Awesome. Will anyone have any closing remarks before I close this out? Okay, well, I will end it there. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And as a reminder, you can check out this recording and everything else on marketplacerisk.com, where you can access hundreds of hours of content and subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date on all events. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and hope everyone has a great week.
Thanks, everybody.